Welcome back. This video is going to continue a discussion of the influence between C.S. Lewis and George MacDonald, or rather, the influence of George MacDonald on C.S. Lewis in the philosophical realm. Not so much the literary realm, although I think the two are related, but in the philosophical influence that MacDonald had on Lewis's work. This presentation is derived from a paper that I wrote a couple of years ago for a conference in Lille, France, on the influence of C.S. Lewis, the influences on C.S. Lewis, his friends and associates, people that had an impact on him. This portion of this series is going to cover the epistemological and ethical influence of MacDonald on Lewis, and so I'm going to read some portions of this for you and comment as we go along. So, when it comes to epistemology, neither MacDonald nor Lewis are epistemologists as such, right? They didn't spend their time writing about justified true belief as philosophers often do. But their philosophical views do have a very clear understanding of knowledge, especially of truth. I take both of their views of knowledge to be essentially a kind of epistemic realism. So I think they're both epistemic realists about knowledge. That is, that knowledge is objective, that we can obtain it, and that knowledge is not something we create, it's something that we have or discover because of our connection to what's ultimately real. They were not relativist about knowledge. They didn't think that there were things like truths for you or falsehoods for me or any kind of relativism or skepticism, especially about divine knowledge. They both were realists about truth and thought that truth was fundamentally a matter of correspondence of reality, again, in a realistic sense. Neither of them are coherentists nor pragmatists, although there are some elements of pragmatism, I think, in MacDonald's work. And that's something we could debate if you like, but I think there's some connections between sort of quasi-pragmatism, but in a realist sense, the importance of the outworking and practicality of truth, I think, is dominant in much of MacDonald's writings, especially his unspoken sermon on truth. When it comes to justification, they both seem to be foundationalists in some sense, maybe a sort of mild or moderate foundationalists. They weren't Cartesian foundationalists or anything like that. But especially in regard to the idea that there can be foundational beliefs that are self-justifying and don't need any other reasons to prove them. Maybe they both accepted something like proper basicality for beliefs, especially belief in God. So here's an example of MacDonald's foundationalism from his book There and Back. It's a longish novel, as many of MacDonald's novels are. Here's what MacDonald wrote. God is God to us, not that we may say he is, but that we may know him. And when we know him, then we are with him at home in the heart of the universe, the heirs of all things. This is foolishness, I know, to the dull soul that only cares for the things that admit of being proved. The unprovable mystery out of which things provable come has for them no interest. They say, because it's improvable. They take for granted, therefore it is unknowable. That the unprovable is necessarily the unknowable, 1,000 beliefs deny. It's a very realistic view. Okay, back to the quotation. If a thing is true in itself, it's not capable of proof, and that man is in the higher condition who is able to believe it. In proportion as a man is a fool, he is unable to believe what is true, what in itself is true. If the intellect be the highest power, that the men of proof are the wisest. If the intellect be the highest power, then the men of proof are the wisest. But if there be something deeper than the intellect, something causing and including it, if there be a creative power of which our intellect is but a faint reflex, then the child of that power, the one who acknowledges and loves and obeys the power, will be the one who understands it. So here I think he's talking about, of course, God and God's will and God's heart, his love for us. Now, Lewis, following MacDonald, did acknowledge and love and obey that power that MacDonald refers to. Lewis had the insight to carry on this foundationalist epistemic principle in The Abolition of Man. Lewis writes there regarding various moral objective truths. He says this, unless you accept these, that is, objective moral values, what Lewis calls the Tao there, unless you accept these without question, As being to the world of action what axioms are to the world of theory, you can have no practical principles whatsoever. You can't reach them as conclusions, they are premises. You may, on the other hand, regard them as rational, nay, as rationality itself. As things so obviously reasonable, they neither demand nor admit of proof. If nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proved. Similarly, if nothing is obligatory for its own sake, then nothing is obligatory at all. So, look, both men believe that there are foundational truths that are true and knowable, but they can't be proven. There are echoes of MacDonald and Lewis's older master, Plato, in, again, back to the Republic. The good cannot be proven. You can't prove to someone anything about the good. Think of Plato's allegory of the cave. The last thing to be seen is, where is it? The sun. That's the last thing to be seen in the allegory. Of course, that's an analogy, or allegory, a functional analog of the good. You can't prove the good to someone. You can't prove what the sun is like to someone. It has to be seen, or rather intellected, in the case of the good. It's interesting to note to me that MacDonald's pastors, the pastors that he has as characters in his novels, who are also the heroes of his novels, oftentimes they read Plato. So MacDonald has his pastors reading Plato on a regular basis. I hope your pastor does. For example, in The Annals of a Quiet Neighborhood, or Seaboard Parish, or Thomas Wingfold. And of course, in Lewis, his characters seem to know their Plato as well, as Lord Diggory says in The Last Battle. It's all in Plato. Plato thought that you can't syllogize your way to the good. You must see it. And both MacDonald and Lewis follow and rise above Plato, their own master. All right, so now that's a bit of the epistemology of the influence of MacDonald and Plato, both influenced by their teacher, Plato. Sorry, the influence of Plato on MacDonald, and MacDonald on Lewis, and Plato on Lewis, and both of them together, going back to Plato. It's all in Plato. All right, so let's turn to the ethical influence of MacDonald on Lewis. So one of the challenges with a philosophical account of a Christian ethics is how to deal with the reality of evil in the world. This poses both a challenge for developing an ethical theory about the nature of goodness as such, and an account of how to have a good life and be a good person. So the problem of evil is also a challenge for believing in God, and takes many forms: logical, evidential, psychological, maybe even pastoral. So MacDonald, again from his book There and Back, tells the story of a pastor who's giving advice to a young lady on how to deal with a skeptical young man, skeptical about believing in God. And it's part of his problem is the problem of evil. And the problem of evil and suffering is raised in this discussion, and MacDonald deals with it by relating a story of a time when he felt that he was obligated to discipline his own son. Here's what he says. If he, the skeptic, say, what reason could justify the inflicting of such suffering? Then tell him what I'm going to tell you now. About a year ago, said Wingfold, the pastor in the story, a little boy displeased me horribly. I will not tell you what he did, but how he could have done the thing, as I find it now, I took him, and bent on making him feel, if not how horrid the thing was in itself, for what imperfect being can ever know the full horror of evil, at least how horrid I thought it. I broke out in strong language. I told him that I must whip him, but I couldn't bear doing it, but rather that he should be damned. Mean, contemptible little rascal. I would kill him, and be hanged for it. So the father's saying, look, I'd rather have myself die and you die than you be evil. It's pretty strong. I'm not sure I'd advise this for parenting advice today. But I'll leave that up to you if you're a parent. And the little boy says this, and even MacDonald says, but going back to the quotation, I dare say it sounds very improper. Well, understatement there. But, well, what do you think the little fellow said? Don't kill me, Papa, he cried. I'll be good. Don't please be hanged for my naughtiness. Whip me, and that will make me good. And then, you couldn't do it? Asked Barbara, anxiously. I cried, said Wingfold, and almost cried again as he said it. I'm not much in the habit of crying. I don't look okay, do I? But I couldn't help it. The little child took out his pocket handkerchief and dried my eyes, and then prepared himself for the whipping. I whipped him as I never did before, and I hope in God shall never have to do again. The moment it was over, my heart was like to burst. He flung his arms around my neck and began kissing me. I'll never make you cry again, Papa, he said. And he's kept his word. And since then, I've never wondered at the suffering in the world. I've puzzled my metaphysical brains to the last gasp about the origin of evil, but I don't do that now, for I seem to understand. But since then, I've never troubled myself about the origin of suffering. And I think that's too easy out for someone to deal with the problem of evil. But that's MacDonald's out. That's what he thinks. There's some deep connection between God's suffering and ours, our suffering and God. Lewis quotes a similar passage from Sir Gibby and George MacDonald in Anthology. He states, "There's a bewilderment," this is quoting Lewis on George MacDonald now, "there's a bewilderment about the very nature of evil, which only he who made us capable of evil that might be good can comprehend." This is the very thing which MacDonald's character, in the story related a moment ago, seems to understand. Evil can be turned toward good. Indeed, this is exactly what our Lord did. Lewis draws from MacDonald on this very point in The Problem of Pain. This is Lewis's great kind of theodicy. Lewis reminds us that MacDonald had taught him that when Jesus was crucified, he did that in the wild weather of his outlying provinces, which we had done at home in glory and gladness. So the ethics of dealing with evil are found in both MacDonald and Lewis, by allowing evil so that good may come, and this through the one who took on himself all the evil it could be, to make us good. All right, so again, to be clear, neither MacDonald nor Lewis think that evil is a necessary outcome of God's creative power, but rather that evil is a privation, a lack of good, but it can be turned into something greater than the evil that comes about through probably something like the exercise of our free will. So I think, in my own opinion, this Lewis and MacDonald both kind of rely on a theodicy of a free will defense, as well as a kind of soul-making, quasi-soul-making theodicy. Might be interesting to compare that theodicy with something like Hick or John Hick's soul-making. Irenaeus, I think, might be the church father who does that as well. That's something to think about. All right, so to conclude this little tour of these several videos, and this last one here on the ethics and epistemology of these two thinkers, these passages from Lewis and MacDonald, they give us a sampling of the way in which Lewis identified himself as the student of his master MacDonald. There's a great deal of philosophy to be mined from George MacDonald's own works. So too, there's a great deal of philosophical influence from MacDonald on Lewis. This identification of student to master is one that Lewis embodied for us. He recognized what was true and good and beautiful in his master's work and followed it. But Lewis did not follow that in his earthly master that he did not believe to be good. Indeed, Lewis offers some strong critical remarks of MacDonald's literary style, especially in his novels, in his introduction to George MacDonald and Anthology. There's something we should take to heart as well. Sometimes the pupil will outpace his master, and the master ought to give way. This is part of growing up intellectually and spiritually. Lewis and MacDonald both had a master who could never be excelled. Indeed, following that perfect master, being his student, is an eternal journey. With this master, it is always and forever further up and further in. Thanks for watching.
Stay psyched, Grom. You!